Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Tiki Bar. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Mike Muhlfelder. Mike has had an illustrious career throughout sales leadership, chief revenue officer. He's a founder of multiple things. So we're really excited to hear all about his story today. And Mike, thank you so much for joining me. How are you?
Thank you. I'm great, Kevin. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
And we usually start with a first question about what you wanted to be when you grew up. But I first need to ask about what's on your chest here. Does this say, "I do all my own stunts"?
Yeah, I do all my own stunts. So I have a lifetime of not taking great care. Well, I've tried to take care of my body, but not being gentle with it. So I tend to break things and strain things and do not pretty things that sometimes heal really well and sometimes they don't. And right now I'm dealing with something that don't. So I hurt myself back in August and kept doing that. I can fix it. I can fix it. Can't fix it. Having surgery on April 8th. So much
So
for that.
what have you been doing? Are these like extreme sports that are causing you these injuries, or what's going on?
No, it's weightlifting and cycling. I'm pretty good at crashing bicycles. Fortunately, I'm good at also walking away from them, but not unscathed. But yeah.
Well,
Don't follow me, I guess is the
unfortunately, I have followed you. So I've done a bunch of triathlons. I've petered out now since we started the business. But yeah, I think a triathlon and cycling, running, all that is extremely fun. And you always think you're being healthy and kind, but there's like a crossover point where you're like, maybe I'm doing a little much here.
yeah, baby. Yeah, I one of my claims to fame is that I crashed a bicycle at almost 50 miles an hour and walked away.
Wow. How'd you do
Yeah.
that?
I did everything wrong. I was coming down a mountain hill, didn't know the road. The bike got away from me, and I was coming into a turn. I knew there was no way I was going to be able to make the turn at the speed that I was going, and then the bike started to wobble. And rather than trying to negotiate it, I gently hit the brakes, even though it was disc brakes, and that was the end of that. Fortunately, I ended up in a ditch that was filled with leaves and sticks and not rocks and big trees. So I was quite bruised. The colors that I turned were amazing
Yeah.
actually. But aside from a couple of comparably minor things, I didn't break anything, and I actually continued riding the bike. So yeah, not something I would recommend. By the way, don't do
No, I would also advise not to do that. You can end up like me because my claim to fame now is that I train with a group of people here in Austin, and one of the guys is like a champion Ironman. He's incredible, but I technically have beaten him in a race because I was going slow and steady, and I was probably like 4 hours behind him. But he crashed his bike and couldn't finish, and so I always tell people how I beat him in a
that. That's it.
race.
It's the footnote. He crashed. NF. That's okay, but I still beat it.
You got it. You got it. All I care about is the win. All right. Well, now my actual first question.
Okay.
You're a little kid running around. You didn't know that you wanted to be a chief revenue officer. The world of sales did not exist yet. What did you want to be when you were growing up?
When I was young, I wanted to be an oceanographer. I still have a strong affinity for the ocean, hence the name of the company where I live. The ocean is 2 minutes that way. I have a very strong affinity for sharks and always have. Always been fascinated by them, and I have sharks 2 minutes away. But unfortunately, as I got older, and I was a terrible student, admittedly a terrible student. And if you want to be an oceanographer, you have to be really good at math and science. And I was not good at either of those things, and it required a lot of studying, which I was not good at studying. So it kind of fell away. But I get to do a lot of the things that are non-scientific as it relates to oceans and sharks just for fun. So it
That's
worked out.
awesome. So did you grow up? You're in Cape Cod. Did you grow up on the Cape as well?
Well, yeah. Technically, no, but yes. So I'm Boston. I was born in Boston. Grew up 15 minutes outside of the city, but my grandparents were here, like literally four doors down from where I live today. So I've been here my entire life. I took my first steps on the beach down the street as a baby. When I was not only was I not a great student, but I was kind of a tough kid to raise. And my parents would put me on the bus and say, go to your grandmother's for the weekend or like a school vacation, like just go. So I spent my entire, as much time as I possibly could here. And as a kid, it was tremendous because it's this old village. Like the road that I live on is like 370 years old, so it predates anything in the long before there was the United States. And as a kid, all those years ago, it was as safe as anywhere in the world you could be. So my grandmother would, in the morning, she's like, "Okay, lunch is going to be at 11:30," and I get on my bike and I'd go. If I had swimming lessons, whatever, but like, and that was it. And then I would come back and we'd have lunch and whatever we were going to do for the afternoon. And she'd say, "Okay, well, dinner's going to be at 5." and I would go. So free range child. It was a really amazing way to get to grow up. And, where I grew up off Cape outside of Boston was very suburban. It was like, if you know the show, The Wonder Years, it was identical. Track housing, houses close together. Whichever house you were in at the time was who was raising you at the time. So that was a pretty good way to grow up as well. But it was also a place where a kid could get in a lot of trouble if you wanted to.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, I love that story of your connection to the Cape, and I'm sure we'll weave that in throughout.
Sure.
But what was the first job that you ever had?
So I've always worked. I mean, always. I was cutting lawns at 11 years old. I was delivering newspapers 11, 12 years old, and did that until I was old enough to get a paying job with a paycheck. And I was still 14. The store that hired me thought I was 15 and I had working papers, which you needed in Massachusetts. But I went to work at a grocery store for minimum wage, which I think was $2.36 an hour or something like that. But I didn't care. And all I wanted to do was earn money. And that's what I did. So I worked every opportunity I had. Sundays were time and a half. Holidays were double time. It was like, yes, put me on the schedule. Just put me on the schedule and I'll be there.
Where did that motivation come from?
I think there's a combination. So my grandmother, who I referenced, was a Depression era, very financially savvy, and taught me, of the grandchildren, I think I was the only one who really took this, but taught me the value of money in terms of the security that it brings. But I also grew up in a situation. My parents were not earners. My mom was a nurse. My dad was in retail. And I actually teased my dad about this not long ago. Nobody could turn $20 into $5 faster than my parents. So I grew up in a situation where if I wanted something, I had to earn the money to get it. It wasn't coming my way. That has served me really well in my life because it's, I'm not afraid of work. I'm not afraid of, doing what needs to be done. And I also value a dollar. Even it doesn't matter how much I earn. I value a dollar, and I'm very careful about how I spend money.
I love that. And you mentioned you were having trouble as a student, but you did go to college. You eventually got into sales. But when you go to college, did you have any idea what you wanted to be? What were you thinking about then?
Yeah. So I went to college as an environmental policy major. So I was kind of following the same path, but it was non-scientific. And, I barely graduated from high school, barely got into college. I'm not being self-deprecating. I got into college because on the strength of my essay and my non-academic experiences. So because I had all this work experience, which was unusual in that day and age, I had been involved in a youth group and was it held an executive role, if you will, for all of New England, which gave me international experience. So I had this other part of my life that dignified me, but I went to college on academic probation. I mean, that's how bad of a student I was. They're like, well, we're going to roll the dice on you. This is like a theme, I guess, in my life. It's like, we're going to roll the dice, see what happens. And I was very fortunate. I had a professor named Robin Gregory, and he was great. And I had him for macroeconomics, microeconomics, international economics, and environmental economics. And we were having coffee one morning. It was my sophomore year, and he said to me, "What do you want to do when you finish college?" And I told him, "Oh, I want to." I don't remember what it was, something with the environment and on and on. And he's like, "Yeah." He goes, "Hey, let me tell you something. That's not what's going to happen." I was like, "Oh, okay." And he said, "You're going to need to go and get your master's, maybe even a legal degree. You're probably going to work for the EPA. You'll make about $15,000 a year." And it's like, and obviously this is long before internet, so you can't really do the research the way you do today. And he said, "Haven't gotten to know you." He said, "You're a business guy." He said, "What you should do is you should go into you should really focus on business, make as much money as you can, and use that money to kind of accomplish the same goals that you want." I was like, "Oh." So I did. So I actually changed my major. We reconnected about 8 years ago, by the way. It was kind of fun online. He remembered this conversation, which was wild, 40 years later.
Wow.
But so I changed my major to management and marketing, and that was that.
I love that. So then how did you get your foot in the door? You started your career, at least from LinkedIn, it looks like at ADP. Tell me the story of how you got started there.
Yeah, so that was, again, the way your life works is not at all to the plan. So I finished college, I went back to my hometown. The guy that I had been working for in retail asked me to take over. He had 3 stores. He asked me to take over as the manager of his main store, which I did, which was kind of weird because now people I'd been working with were working for me, and many of them were, more than twice something, 3 times my age. But I was making like, I want to say $230 a week take home, working 40 hours a week. And I had a professor who was involved in a startup business, not technical. It's literally selling. It was a shop at home food service. You get 5 months worth of meat and groceries. You buy a freezer, all this stuff. One call close, and she said she knew I needed money. She knew I was broke, and she said, "Why don't you just you can do it part time, and it's at night, so you can do it on top of your retail job." I was like, "Great, let's do that." So I it was a reluctant move, but I did, Kevin. I needed money. I was broke, and I had some student loans I had to pay back, and a car loan and rent because my parents had moved away. So I was like, I was on my own, and it quickly became apparent that I was making more working 2 nights a week than I was working 40 hours a week.
Selling these
Selling,
meals.
yeah, like shop at home food service, husband and wife at their kitchen table, one call close, you're in and out in 2.5 hours.
So take me through that actual, because I didn't see this on LinkedIn. This is very interesting.
No, this wouldn't be on LinkedIn. This is long before, like, this is a straight commission job. There was a telemarketing team. They would give you get your lead. They give you the name, the address, husband and wife's name, what they did for a living if we had that, and if they were referred by another customer. Big reference business when you could get it. And you'd go to the house, and I could be anywhere from a beautiful executive home in the suburbs to a rental flat in Dorchester. Everybody eats. And what I didn't understand then is that it's still an emotional sale. It's always an emotional sale, and it's even more emotional because it's food. But we had to learn our pitch, and we had a pitch book that you took them through the pitch book with pictures, and then you had to pick out the menu with them, and you try to sell them the freezer, and that was on a plan, and you'd have to fill out the credit app by hand. I like sitting at the tables. I did that for 3 years, and in 3 years I probably sold, if I were to pick a number, 400 deals. So you get good at qualifying. You get kind of good at selling and overcoming objections. Now that company went away for a variety of reasons. I guess the statute of limitations is up. A couple of the people ended up going to jail because they were funding the business through non-legal ways. It might have even been a front for all I know. Once the Fed showed up and started taking people away in handcuffs, I was like, I think it's time for me to move on. So now I need a job. Right, I'm 3 years out of school, 3.5 years out of school. I've moved in with my then girlfriend, who became my wife. I'm broke, so I opened up the phone book, Yellow Pages. Again, like for people listening, like this is how things used to work. Opened up the Yellow Pages and started making phone calls, and I called EDP, Automatic Data Processing. I had no idea who or what they were, other than it was a business. Got the recruiter, Mark Walbars, told him who I was, what I did. He's like, come in for an interview. So I came in, and for whatever reason, and I did not fit the hiring profile at all, he passed me on to the VP of sales for a meeting. VP of sales is a guy named Paul Bugley, the late great Paul Bugley. And when I say I didn't fit the profile, most of my coworkers had sold copiers or business equipment, something like that. They'd gone, done the door-to-door, put on a suit and tie every day type of sale. I had never done anything like that. So Paul was a big man. He played football. He'd hug you and you felt like a little kid because he was such a big dude. And I remember standing outside of his office after I interviewed him, and he said, you don't fit the profile here at all, but I'm going to take a chance on you because I think you're going to work harder than anybody else here. That was it. So it's how I ended up in B2B sales. Now, the other part of that, by the way, was I had an uncle who had been selling for Motorola for years. And he had always been frustrated by the fact that I was doing this commission job. And he had been saying to me, get a job with a company that is going to train you. If they will not invest in you, you shouldn't go to work for them. ADP had an amazing training program. You're for like 2.5 weeks of just heads down learning ADP, learning selling, all that. And there was even like pre-work before that. So by the time you were in the field, you had a pretty good idea what you were doing.
I like that. So you were successful selling the meal stuff, but now you're sort of moving up in the world into B2B, and obviously it clicks because the rest of your career. But I'm curious if there's a moment that sticks out when you are selling those first few deals at ADP where you're like, I am good at this. If there's a deal or something where you're like, this makes sense for me.
It wasn't a deal. It was making President's Club my first year. Because I was at ADP for 6 years, and I made President's Club 4 times, and that is the measure, or was the measure at ADP of can you sell or not. Even today, I can meet somebody who was at ADP, current or same time I was there 30 plus years ago, and the first question is, how many clubs did you make? So, and what happened was, I was hired. The fiscal year was already going. They gave me my quota. It was adjusted for the year. And we get to the last week of the year, and it was a June 30 fiscal close. So it's summertime. And I get to the office, and I am like, head down. I was $1,500. Remember, $1,500. I think it was actually $1,560 if I'm going to be like specific, off of the number to make President's Club. So I missed. And I was like, I just felt terrible. So I get to the office, and Paul pulls me in, and he says, "What are you so upset about?" I was like, "I missed. I'm not going to the club." He goes, "Go into the meeting room." So ADP had a thing called roll call. I think they still do it. Every Tuesday night, sales teams get together, and you would say how much you sold, or if you didn't sell anything. So you'd be like, $1,800, 2 units, which was basically today what we call 2 new logos. And if you didn't sell anything, you had to say pass. And if you said pass, like people were like, it's okay, Mike. And if you passed 2 weeks in a row, people would notice. And if it was 3 weeks in a row, these were small teams. Like everybody would be like, he hasn't sold anything in 3 weeks. And we were selling, that was payroll to generally small to medium businesses. So it was a 1-call, 2-call close kind of deal. So that fit also what I had done in the past. So Paul comes into roll call that night, and he says, I have an interesting piece of news for you all. He said, every 5 years, there's a fiscal aberration, and ADP adds a week to the sales fiscal year because there's 4.3 weeks in a month, and whatever the math was. He said, so what that means is if you didn't make President's Club, you have 1 more week. Wow. And I was like, whoa! And that was it. I was like, gone. It was like 7 o'clock at night. I was like, I'm gone. And I made President's Club. And I made President's Club, by the way, by like $250. That was it. It's like, but it didn't matter. I made President's Club. And that was the point. It was like, I can do this. Like I can, like these are kids who went to, or people who went to, good schools that have had these, at that point, early but strong careers doing something I had never even dreamed of doing. And now I'm going to the same President's Club they are. So that was when it clicked.
I love that, and good on them for having a President's Club that was
President's
provided.
Club. Great, I love President's.
Yeah, they're the best. So it sounds like you had some leadership experience early when you were running the retail stores, but you also quickly gained that in your B2B sales career. So I'm curious, what was the biggest surprise for you? Obviously, you're kind of a high performing individual contributor out the gate. Once the job changes and you have to start managing people, what surprised you most about that?
Yeah, so there were a lot of lessons in this, by the way. So when I was like doing retail management, I didn't know anything. I was a dumb kid. And when there was a program at ADP called Sales Training Manager, where it was a player coach role, and I did that, and I stopped. I stopped like 3 months in, 4 months in, for a couple of reasons. But the biggest one was like, I don't know anything yet. I can teach people the basics of this, but I need more experience if I'm going to teach and lead people. So I stopped, and I didn't go do anything in sales leadership again until 2004. So it was like 12 years, another 12 years of individual contributors selling before I moved into a leadership role. That may be, and maybe, I don't want to be the old guy on the porch yelling, get off my lawn, but that may be one of the biggest differences today. Is when I think about the people that were my leaders in the first 15 to 18 years of my career, they were people who had done the job for a long time. So when they said, do this, don't do that, it came from a place of experience.
Yeah.
And by the time I stepped into sales leadership, between the food job and ADP and working in technology-enabled selling, which became CRM. I had, I don't know, pick a number, 1,000 deals under my belt, 750 deals under my belt, never mind the ones that I lost. So I felt like I actually had something to offer back when I went into a leadership role.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think we do see that a lot, especially in some of the higher volume, kind of lower depth sales. Folks get really good at learning the internal processes, which is important, but then they get thrust into management and they have to rely too much on just that understanding. And it doesn't create the depth of seller that you need.
Yeah, and it's not to take away, there are amazing leaders out there that are, in their 20s and 30s. I get that. But there is no substitute for experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk about that experience then. So then you do become a leader. What is the biggest personal learning curve for you in shifting from IC to leader?
It actually, I probably would not have been able to put words to this before, but it was an episode of all things of West Wing, if you ever watched that show.
Yeah.
Martin Sheen plays the president. Was his name Barrett? But I don't remember. Whatever his name was. So it shows you how much attention I paid to the show. But it was this one line, and he was scolding somebody who had wasn't being deferential or didn't understand. They had really made a mistake, and he said, "You have to understand, when you are the president, your words carry weight, and it was the higher up you go in the organization, the more weight your words have. More people are watching you, what you do and what you say, and will emulate you or talk about you based on what you say and do." And that really stuck with me. And you get into organizations like the size of Oracle. So I went to Oracle through an acquisition, or IBM, who I went to through an acquisition. Yes, you're a small piece of a massive pie, 70,000, 80,000, 500,000 people, but you still have an organization around you that could be 100 or 150 people, and they're watching you, and they're reading your emails, and they're reacting and responding and taking action based on what you say as a leader. And I've tried to carry myself for 20 years with that in mind. That's not to say I make a lot of mistakes. I've made a ton of mistakes, but I try to only make a mistake once.
I like that a lot, because I think I feel a tension sometimes between, I want to think more about what I say because folks are listening. I want to think about what I write and have it be very clear. But then you also can get into this trap where you're overdoing it and you're becoming either robotic or you're just wasting too much time to produce communication. How do you think about that balance of being yourself, getting your communication out candidly, but also being thoughtful?
Yeah, I think I've always been my authentic self, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I was good at what I was doing, or that I communicated well. That's who and what I was. So I could be abrupt and brusque with people. It never came from a bad place, but it was. I think I was like, well, part of that's an aging process too. But I was impatient, and if I said, let's do it this way, and then you didn't do it that way, I'd be like, why didn't you do it that way? We talked about it. And some of that still exists. Like if we agree and I tell my teams when I start, if we agree on an action or a strategy, you don't get to unilaterally change your mind and go do something different. We talk about it, because that's how strategy works. But as I've gotten older, and certainly in the last 5 or 6 years of my own personal journey, that authenticity has become far more, I'll use the word important, but I don't operate with an agenda with people. And I don't know that I ever really did that much, but I'm not transactional. I do a lot of work and spend a lot of time with people. I'm not going to make any money from it, but I get there's value to actual relationships. And I think that has been a big part of my leadership and leadership style, is that people know that if they ask me a question, they'll get an answer. You may not like the answer, and that's I don't control whether you like the answer or not. But nobody walks away and says, I don't think Muhlfelder was being straight with me.
Yeah. There's trust.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a couple interesting acquisitions that you went through, and I'm curious if in your journey through a few acquisitions, if there is a story that is most interesting, or if one of those was the hardest.
Well, they're all hard in different ways, and I've been through a lot. I mean, I can go back, actually even back to ADP. So back during when I was at ADP, many banks still had payroll services, and they were getting out of that business. So ADP was buying, like, if almost every month we were buying a bank payroll service, sometimes absorbing employees, always absorbing customers, and that like carried on. So M&A has been an undercurrent for my entire professional career. There's only been a couple of places I've been where M&A was not part of the deal. And one of the ones that really resonated was when IBM acquired Cast Iron. First of all, we didn't see it coming, or I didn't. I was running sales, and it was like it came out of nowhere for me. And I had to explain to my team that, first of all, we were a 60-person company about to be absorbed by a 500,000-person company. And that one of the things that we needed to be aware of, and this is not to be derogatory about IBM at all, but IBM is not a tech company. That's what they want you to believe, but that's not who and what they are. They're a patent company, and they're a finance company, and they're a legal company, and an HR company. So when you get into a large organization, a large corporation, you're not necessarily doing what the name says on the door. And I had to learn a lot about corporate politics and what worked for me personally and professionally. And one of the things that did not work for me was after a decision was made to collapse the acquisition and fold us into the general population, which was, when I learned how the decision was made, it was horrific. Because the decision was made off of bad data. There was no discussion with me running the organization, and their data was wrong. And it almost cost a lot of people their jobs. We were fortunate to be able to save all but one. But I couldn't operate in this way where, I guess back to this point of like, I was working for somebody when I left who had never sold, and he was a project manager. And he was also very offended by how much money that I made, more than him. And he would make that a point in every conversation when compensation came up. So he's like, that's not what I'm about. I'm about people, and I'm about, the action and activity of selling and driving revenue for the business. And there are things that have to happen to drive revenue. And it became a mismatch. It's not derogatory. I made a lot of money. I made great friends. I learned a lot, but it's when you go through M&A a bunch of times, there are a few things that you learn. And one of them is you don't control a lot of your destiny, but you control some of it. And this has been my advice that I'll share here. When your company gets acquired, you end up either with no job, same job, or a bigger job. You control some of that. If you go into that acquisition fighting it, like when I was at PeopleSoft, Oracle acquired PeopleSoft, it was a hostile takeover, very different than the IBM Cast Iron thing. There were a lot of people who fought that acquisition. I fought it, but I ended up joining them. But they couldn't make the turn after the deal was done. So they ended up with no job. A lot of people ended up with the same job that they had at PeopleSoft, just getting a check from a different company. And many of them stayed there, and I'm now seeing them retiring from Oracle over 20 years later. Awesome, great for them. And then there were other people who were like, I'm going to make the most of this. I'm going to take advantage of it. I'm going to kick ass. I'm going to do a great job. And they got promoted. They ended up with bigger jobs. So you have to decide what you want in your life and operate accordingly. If you complain and you are difficult to work with and you don't like your situation and you tell everybody around you, there's a good chance you're going to end up without a job. And I can tell you right now, I've fired more times. I've had to fire my top rep because that top rep was also a cancer in the organization. Can't have both.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a great story. What was your favorite product that you ever sold? I always enjoy asking salespeople and sales leaders this question because there's some that always just perk up where it's like, oh yeah, this makes my job a lot easier.
So there's two. The first product that I sold, technology-enabled selling, which became Salesforce Automation, which became CRM. The early days of selling that were a blast. I loved selling it. I was a sales guy selling to salespeople. people liked it. They enjoyed what the product. And salespeople, a lot of them are like, you're not taking my Rolodex, which look up what Rolodex is if you're not sure. But it was a fun sale. The one that it was probably the most fun ever was cast iron, because the first part of that sale, it was a very technical sale, integration technology, but it was the first real low code, no code integration solution. Massive disruptor in the market. But the first thing was suspending disbelief. People did not believe that you could integrate SAP, incredibly difficult technology, and Salesforce, fairly simple cloud technology, that you could do it without writing any code and you could do it in a couple of minutes. They're like, nope, can't be done. And then you would do it in a demo and they'd be like, wow.
I love that.
It was so much fun.
I think some people still don't believe that. So
yeah. It's similar to where we are with AI. I don't believe that you could do that.
Absolutely. So you're doing a lot of stuff now. And so I wanted to specifically ask about how you got started with Revenue Magazine, because I was kind of checking it out online. There's a lot of great content in there, by the way, just for people who are listening to go check it out. So did you always write, or was that new?
A little bit of both. So even back to when I was a terrible student, I did like to write, and I liked creative writing, and I like case studies. As I've progressed through my career, I started with LinkedIn before most people had heard of it. It's like I think I'm like 20 years or so on LinkedIn, but I didn't start really writing content until about 5 years ago. And along the way, even before that, I had gotten introduced. I did a webinar 12 years ago with a guy named Keenan, who's written Not Taught and Gap Selling. Wonderful guy, brilliant. So we've just, over the last bunch of years, we've exchanged communications, etc. And I was in the cohort of people writing on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. So when he started Revenue Magazine, he tapped, I think there were like 30 of us, and he tapped me as one of the founding writers. And I was shocked. Now, here's a published author held in very high regard. Saying, would you like to write for this magazine? I was like, of course I would. And we don't get paid for it, by the way. It's a free magazine. We don't do this because we enjoy it and we want to help salespeople and leaders get better. But it was just, part of the luck in my life. I'm a super, super fortunate guy. I've been very, very lucky, as you can tell from the conversation, many times in my life. But, I also believe that the harder you work, the luckier you get. So I like to write. I like to help people, or try to help people. I'm actually a fairly low ego guy. It may not come across that way, but so the Revenue Magazine gives me an opportunity to share my thoughts and ideas and experiences with other people. And sometimes it's valuable and sometimes nobody reads it. Okay.
I read it because I was checking it out and I was like, oh, this is awesome. So I've got a bookmark now, and I recommended those out there. So you're doing some fractional work now. You've held executive sales roles. You've been an individual contributor. If we look back, what's been the most dramatic shift you've seen in how sales worked on day one at ADP to today?
The training and leadership has changed. And in fact, before this, I had a call that was a very difficult call because the people I was talking to were not trained. And I'm trying to help them. I don't know what will happen with it, but just it bothers me that there are salespeople out there trying to do their job. They're not doing anything wrong or bad, but they're not being trained. And I have written about this. I'm not going to be shy about it. We have now, I would say, 2 generations of salespeople and sales leaders that have not been well trained in how to sell. Now that's going to piss people off, and that's fine. I'm willing to have this conversation with anybody at any level. But when you change jobs constantly, and I understand the reasons why that happens, and you may have a couple of times in your career, as I have, where you're changing jobs in a year or even less than a year. But if that's your pattern, you're not learning what you need to learn to be really good at selling. I'm going to tell you again, I'll challenge anybody on this. You have to put in the time, and you have to work through difficult situations, product that may not be perfect, leaders that you don't like, markets that are tough to sell to, extremely competitive situations. If your answer to that is, I'm going to go over here because this product is more interesting, or they're going to pay me another $10,000 a year, you make it, your career becomes much more difficult versus you put your head down for 2 or 3 years or 5 years and you figure it out. And that makes you more valuable later on. I love technology. I love AI. I think it's great. But what we've done, and I see this, I just wrote about this again. We layer technology into the sales and marketing stack, but we don't address the underlying process. So it's like, I'm going to give you this AI tool. I'm going to give you a CRM solution, but it's not helping me because I don't know what to do with it. I don't even know why you want me to use it. Oh, so that you want me to use it so I can get more meetings. Okay, great. I'll use this LinkedIn AI tool and send out 100 LinkedIn messages to executives, but the tool doesn't work because it's sending a message that is obviously canned. It is obviously AI generated. It doesn't read the profile properly. So I hit delete. What did you accomplish for doing that? Nothing other than you hit your vanity metric of 100 LinkedIn in-mails. Awesome. Don't care. I don't care. Like, I care about revenue. So I think this is like the biggest change is like back at ADP, we had metrics that we had to hit every week for bank calls and customer calls and new calls and cold canvases, foot canvas. And we had those metrics, but the metrics were used for us and our managers to be able to say, if you are doing all those things and you're not making your number, we need to look at why. Is it training? Is it territory? Certainly wasn't product. If you're not making your number and you're doing all those, or you are making your number and you're doing all those things, great, do more of it. And today, I think, and this has been going on for years, is we are very caught up in vanity metrics of 100 dials, 50 emails, X4, X5, X pipeline. And I've written about this too. Ridiculous. X pipeline, 4X pipeline? No. I would say you probably are, maybe 2.5X is what you need, but you have to know how to sell and how to qualify, which we don't teach people to do that. We teach them BANT. Please do not BANT me ever. It's 70 years old, Kevin. IBM came up with BANT 70 years ago. And the B is budget. If I ask you for your budget, one of two things is going to happen. You're either going to lie to me or you're going to say, I'm not allowed to tell you that. And why? Because the fear says, well, if I tell Mike that I've got $100,000 budget, he's going to come in at 99.9.
We were looking at a particular subset of software for our company the other day, and there's like 4 providers that kind of offer the same thing. Not one of them has their price on their website. Not one of them has a demo on their website. So I'm in Reddit looking at actual demos so I can just see what the product does, figuring out what the price is. But you have to then schedule a call. I scheduled a call with one of them for the next day just to get the price. And they have a process by which they trigger the SDR to call you before your call with the rep just to ask you your budget and your timeline. So just call, hey, I'm from XYZ. Just wanted to confirm before the call and get that person prepared for it. Do you have a budget and a timeline? Just like,
yeah. Yeah. So my teams, and we've been doing this for 8 years, roughly 8 years across, I think it's like 8 companies now but whether I was running sales or in my fractional role, we ask, they're called the 4W questions. It's conversational qualifying. The first question that we ask a prospect is what happened. B2B in particular, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, today's the day I'm hiring a fractional head of sales. Today's the day I'm buying an integration solution. That Mike Muhlfelder, he's a pretty good guy. He's been reaching out to me. I think I'm going to call him and buy an integration solution today. That's not what happens, period. There's a catalyst, a trigger event. And the first thing we need to understand is, what was the trigger event? Because it's not pain either, by the way. We've been taught for decades to sell the pain. I was taught that way. I've taught people to sell that way. Nope. Pain is not why people buy. People are in pain all the time. I've been in pain since August with my shoulder. I'm finally having something done about it because it got to a point where it's untenable. I have to do something about it. Businesses are the same. And if the first thing we ask somebody is, hey, Kevin, tell me what happened that you reached out to my company. And what I want to know and understand is, well, I was in a meeting with the CFO and the CFO said, if you don't fix this problem, whatever the problem is, in the next 60 days, Kevin, you're fired, man. I'm taking you out. Okay. So now we've moved from pain to an untenable situation. I want to know who owns the project. I'm not calling that person, but what I want to know, especially in today's selling economy, there's a senior executive saying, you need to go fix this. Because if I don't have a strong trigger and I don't have a senior executive saying, go fix it, I'm not selling anything. And I don't have to ask the budget question either. Because so the 4 questions: what happened? Who owns the project? Why do you need to do anything now, which is the business problem? And then the 4th is, when do you need to be in production? Not when you're making a decision. Once I understand those things, I know that there's budget. Because no senior executive in today's world is going to say, hey, Mike, I know that you've got tons of time available to you every week. I have tons of time. I would like you to go and evaluate 4 vendors for something we want to buy in 2026. So that's what we want to understand in qualification. Does it make sense for us to spend time together or not? And then discovery is a separate step to decide, does my solution fit here? Should we go on the journey together or not? There's nothing valuable in a pipeline of stuff that won't close. And that's what we see. I come into these companies and I take the pipeline, the forecast, I apply aging to it. And it's like, oh my goodness, your average sales cycle is 63 days. Anything more than 180 days old is probably not qualified. And you've got to go back and qualify it and then take it out, rip it out of the pipeline and start over.
Absolutely.
So we don't teach any of this stuff, by the way, or all too often. RevOps kind of does some of it. Sales does some of it, but nobody actually knuckles down and says, this is how you run a sales operation to go from lead to close. That's what sales does, lead to close.
I love that. Mike, I could ask you questions about that for about another 3 hours, but I am coming up on my time. So my last question for you today, and maybe we'll do this again, is what's a book or a piece of content that you find yourself recommending to people over and over again? And bonus points if it's not in the world of sales or go-to-market.
Yeah. The books there are 3 books that I recommend. They're not sales books or really even business books. One, it doesn't matter what or who you are. It's a quirky book, but it's called The 4 Agreements. It's a great book. Okay. Yep. Been around for, I don't know how many, way longer than I've been around. The 4 Agreements is a wonderful book, and it helps, I think, people to center themselves and to stop getting caught up in what people think about them and make no assumptions, take nothing personally, do your best. It seems basic, but it's a great book. Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday, especially as you move into leadership roles. By the way, if you have kids are also really good for taking away your ego and humbling you. Yeah. And I've been humbled, as Mike Tyson would say, I've been humbled in ways that I never would have imagined in my life by kids and just by life. And the 3rd book, which I've recommended countless times, I have 2 copies of it, 2 editions on the shelf behind me, is Leadership and Self-Deception.
I haven't heard of that one.
It's by the Arbinger Institute. I've read the 2 editions 5 times now. I probably recommended it 50.
Wow.
It is a tremendous book about what we do to ourselves, which then cascades to how we treat and operate with other people. And it's not, even though it's called Leadership and Self-Deception, it's a great book for people, for adults.
See, that's why I love getting to do this show, because I'm going to order that book today and I'm going to read it this weekend.
It's quick. Yeah, you'll read it in the weekend.
Mike.
And probably again in a few months. You may be the first. I've not had anybody come back to me and say, that wasn't a good book. It's a great book.
This is why I ask the questions, because when it's people's tops, it's just a slam dunk. Mike, thanks so much for taking us through your story and letting me learn from you and the listeners learn from you. And we'll link to your posts on LinkedIn and to Call Motion Sales and Revenue Magazine and all that you're doing in the post. And yeah, we'd love to do this again sometime. Thanks so much, Mike.
I love it. Thank you for letting me tell my story and to talk. I mean, who doesn't love an opportunity to talk about themselves?